Imagine a weapon that doesn't explode. No nuclear flash. No shockwave. No radiation. Yet when it strikes, the destruction rivals that of a small nuclear weapon. Not because of chemistry, but because of physics. This was the idea behind Project Thor, more commonly known as rods from God. A theoretical space-based weapon designed to strike Earth from orbit using nothing more than gravity, speed, and raw mass. The concept sounds almost too simple. Drop an object from space. Let it accelerate to hypersonic speeds, and allow kinetic energy to do the rest. Unlike nuclear or conventional weapons, Project Thor relied on pure motion. No explosives. No warheads. Just an object moving so fast that on impact, it would release catastrophic energy. The promise was staggering. Nuclear-level destruction without nuclear fallout. The physics behind the fear. At the heart of Project Thor lies a basic physical principle: kinetic energy. Energy increases with mass, but more importantly, with the square of velocity. An object falling from orbit doesn't just fall. It accelerates. Project Thor's projectiles were designed to re-enter Earth's atmosphere at speeds approaching 36,000 feet per second, roughly Mach 10, comparable to a meteor. At those velocities, even a solid metal rod becomes a weapon of immense power. Upon impact, the rod's kinetic energy would be released almost instantaneously, producing destruction comparable to an 11-ton TNT explosion or the penetrating force of a ground-burst nuclear weapon without radiation. That combination alone is what made military planners uneasy. How the system was supposed to work. The proposed system involved 2 satellites orbiting hundreds of miles above Earth. One satellite would handle targeting, tracking, and communications. The second would carry multiple dense metal rods, stored and ready for release. When a strike order was issued from the ground, the targeting satellite would guide its partner. One rod would be released, protected by a thermal coating, and begin its descent. From orbit to impact, the entire process would take less than 15 minutes. Unlike missiles, there would be no launch plume to detect. No warhead to intercept. Just a silent object falling from space. Once expended, the system wouldn't need to be replaced, only reloaded by launching additional rods. On paper, it was efficient. In reality, it was anything but. Why tungsten was chosen? The material of choice was tungsten. Not by accident. Tungsten is extraordinarily dense and has one of the highest melting points of any metal. These qualities made it ideal for surviving atmospheric reentry while maximizing kinetic energy. Each rod was envisioned to be telephone pole-sized, up to 20 feet long and 1 foot in diameter. Other materials were briefly considered. Uranium posed reactivity concerns. Titanium offered better heat resistance, but lacked the density needed for maximum impact. Even tungsten, however, came with serious problems. At hypersonic speeds, metals behave less like solids and more like fluids. Intended military role. Strategically, Project Thor promised something no other weapon system could offer. First, deep penetration. The rods were designed to burrow into the Earth before releasing their energy, making them ideal for destroying underground bunkers, missile silos, and hardened command centers. Second, global reach. Any point on Earth could theoretically be struck in minutes, giving almost no warning and leaving little chance for defense. Third, non-nuclear deterrence. Because the system carried no nuclear material, it was seen as a way to deliver nuclear-scale destruction without triggering immediate nuclear retaliation, a tempting option in a world terrified of escalation. And finally, precision. In theory, a single rod could eliminate a high-value target without leveling an entire city. But theory is where Project Thor began to fall apart. A weapon that never left the drawing board. Despite repeated appearances in military studies and think tank reports, Project Thor never advanced beyond the conceptual stage. It was referenced in early 2000s U.S. Air Force planning documents and RAND Corporation analyses, but never approved for development, testing, or deployment. There is no evidence, public or classified, that such a system has ever existed operationally, and the reasons are many. Technical reality versus concept. One of the biggest technical challenges was impact physics. Experts argued that at extreme velocities, the rods wouldn't penetrate deeply at all. Instead, they would vaporize or fragment, dispersing energy near the surface rather than burrowing underground. Research from Sandia National Laboratories suggests that penetration efficiency peaks at around 1 kilometer per second. Beyond that, the projectile's tip begins to liquefy. At hypersonic speeds, more velocity doesn't mean more penetration, it means more material failure. Then there's reentry heat. As the rod descends, it generates intense friction, forming a plasma sheath that blocks sensors and communications. Once released, the rod becomes effectively blind. Any deformation during descent could alter its trajectory. Any wobble could ruin accuracy. Guidance systems were essentially useless after release. Even terminal velocity became a limiting factor. Atmospheric drag would slow the rod significantly, reducing its energy to the equivalent of 3 to 4 tons of TNT, destructive, but far less than early claims suggested. Enough to devastate a small area, but not to replace nuclear weapons. The crushing cost problem. Even if the physics worked, economics did not. Launch costs alone were staggering. At roughly $5,000 per kilogram, placing a single 8-ton tungsten rod into orbit would cost tens of millions of dollars. Add propulsion systems, guidance hardware, orbital platforms, and maintenance, and costs ballooned rapidly. Internal estimates suggested that each rod could cost over $200 million. That meant every strike would cost more than deploying advanced aircraft squadrons or cruise missile barrages. For a supposedly rapid response weapon, it was financially unsustainable. Logistical nightmares in orbit. Satellites don't stay in one place. They orbit the Earth roughly every 100 minutes, creating what planners called the absentee ratio. Long periods when the weapon simply isn't in position. To guarantee rapid global coverage, dozens or even hundreds of platforms would be required. And then there was space debris. Past anti-satellite tests have already filled Earth's orbit with thousands of fragments. Introducing kinetic weapons would only worsen the problem, potentially rendering entire orbital regions unusable. Legal and strategic fallout. International law posed another major obstacle. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 bans weapons of mass destruction in orbit, but doesn't clearly prohibit conventional weapons. Project Thor sat in a dangerous gray zone, technically legal, strategically destabilizing. Deploying such a system would almost certainly be seen as the weaponization of space, triggering international outrage and encouraging other nations to follow. A space-based arms race would become inevitable. Why Project Thor still matters today. Although Project Thor was never built, its influence lives on. Modern hypersonic weapons rely on the same kinetic principles. Missile defense systems now use hit-to-kill interceptors. Space-based sensors and interceptors are being actively developed as of 2025 to 2026. China is researching hypersonic projectiles and orbital bombardment concepts. The US continues investing billions into space-based defense. Even directed energy systems now carry the name Thor, a reminder of how persistent the idea remains. Final reality check. Project Thor was not cancelled because it was impossible. It was abandoned because it was impractical, expensive, and dangerously destabilizing. A weapon that didn't explode, yet threatened to change warfare forever. In the end, Project Thor became a warning, not a weapon. A reminder that sometimes the most frightening ideas are the ones that almost worked. And as space becomes the next military frontier, the real question isn't whether such weapons can be built, but whether humanity can keep choosing not to build them.